Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jon Myer Podcast. Today's topic: data-driven strategies without data. Now, wait a second. Are you able to have strategies without data? Or are they really a strategy? I'm not really sure, but how about we let our first guest introduce themselves? Eric.
Hello, I'm Erik. I'm from Italy. I'm a FinOps specialist and consultant, and I love data driven strategies. And at one of my recent gigs, I had to do that without data. So that's what we are going to talk about today.
Before we get to doing a strategy without data, how about you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, your background, where you come from, what are you doing, how'd you get into this field?
Well, I stumbled into this field by accident. I come from software engineering and I worked as a system integration specialist. So basically, I supported software companies integrating hardware into their software. And I became the leading subject matter expert for, honestly, globally. And I opened my consulting company, and this was for hospitality because these were radio-driven devices and radio, not Wi-Fi. So you had a maximum speed of 1 kilobyte per second, so a huge bottleneck, or rather a tiny small bottleneck, we would say. And I helped all the customers and partners to work around those bottlenecks. And I thought, I should open my own consulting company, and that was 2019. And if you remember what happened in 2019, it was not the best year of opening a consulting company for the hospitality sector. So yeah, that went well. So I joined a startup that was doing something in the cloud, and their project was so bad, honestly. So I started looking into how to do that better and looked into serverless. I'd never done anything in the cloud before. I was total newbie, but I applied bottleneck thinking again, and I built something decent, I would say, not perfect but decent, and it was at least hyper scalable and fairly efficient. And I got the attention of an American company, which with a quite special business model. They acquired companies with technical debt, and so I was sitting in the central technical product management team and helping them analyze existing software and migrate that to the cloud very fast, typically within a couple of weeks. And then we tore those products down, recreated them for the cloud. And that's how I came into FinOps, as in cost optimization for the cloud, but also working with the people to get them to understand the cloud better, to drive efficiency and stuff like that. So very long story cut short, this is how I got into the cloud and with FinOps. And I've been doing this for the last 5 years or so. And yeah, now I'm back solo again, consulting, and I help my customers typically understand the reasons why the cloud bills can spike up and down, and not always be horrified if the cost goes up, because I always say costs are totally irrelevant. Because what happens if costs go up? Should you celebrate? Maybe the revenue went up by 100% and the cost went up by 10%. Then you should celebrate. If it's the other way around, you should hire somebody to help you with the costs. And that's what I do. Yeah, and this is how I landed up in the cloud. And I love doing this because I get bored quite easily. And this in this job, one day is never like the next. It's always something new, always something to look up to, some new services, some new configuration types, some new strategies. I love it. I love it.
I agree with you. I think having a different day every day of the week, you don't know what you're getting involved in. Even if you're working on the same project, there's a lot of things that change. You change so quickly in technology and including the cloud. Eric, talk to me a little bit more about FinOps. You and I deal with FinOps. We talk a lot about it. We share a lot of content around it. What's your feelings here on FinOps?
Well, I think that when I first joined the FinOps community, I thought, great, there's now a framework. It's an operative framework, basically, or operational framework, and it helps you exactly what to do. And then I realized basically what everyone was struggling with was actually to do something like getting engineers to take action upon your recommendations. And I thought it was basically, yeah, that's the need why FinOps was created, because they were struggling with getting people and companies to change. And that is still, even if it's not the priority number one as of the new survey of this year, it's still a high priority. It's still a challenge. It's so difficult. There are so many companies that approach the cloud also for the wrong reasons, because someone high up said, because the others are doing it, so we're doing it as well. And basically now go, good luck. And Yeah, so it's how can I say? So I like the practical, the pragmatical approach to FinOps, rather getting my hands dirty than establishing some theory about what somebody should do. So whenever I go in with a team, I dive deep with them immediately, and we analyze things together rather than just giving high level recommendations. So I love it dirty and deep, and I love to do almost like the old days of pair programming. So it's something that I still, yeah, like to get involved and keep my feet to the ground that way.
I like FinOps, the culture, the framework of implementation you talked about, which was the number one thing back in 21, 22, 23 of getting engineers to take action. For the 2024, it's fallen down just slightly on the list of getting to take action. But in my opinion, that's nothing new. Getting engineers to take action has been a long-standing thing because your graded, your metrics, your livelihood depends upon keeping that application up and running. Why do you want to touch it? The data is really, really key in trusting that and understanding the data and the actions to be performed, and then showing the value and having the engineers understand it is my opinion and why they would perform an action. Because think of it this way, I'm an engineer, it's not my dollars. So if I provision more, that's great. But in the end, the engineer needs to understand that those extra dollars can go back into them, back into investing them and into the company and doing more and greater things. What are your thoughts?
I think you touch the spot there, basically, right? Dot on. But the problem is you need them engineers to give them space to become heroes as well. So if they are already working at 110% to let the infrastructure run smoothly, and on top of that, give them recommendations, you should also become more efficient. Then yeah, it's not going to work. They need to have time to do that, and also be aware of that it needs doing. So in my opinion, what you need doing is you need that from top down. You need the approval to change the KPIs and introduce new KPIs in the company. Otherwise, if you just add it on the side, then you depend almost as a practitioner. You depend on the goodwill and the extra legwork of engineers going the extra mile. But if you think, as you said it yourself, so imagine, okay, I don't want to bash engineers, but in any company, if you're doing your stuff and working towards your KPIs, if some manager, phones you and said, "Have you been doing this other thing?" and you say no, what happens to your career? Not much, because you're working towards your KPIs. You can say, "Hey, I was doing my stuff.
You're not
This
measured
is some."
upon it. So who
Yeah,
cares, right?
yeah, that's not my remit, right? So in that sense, even if you as a practitioner try to get them to do something by shouting at them, it won't work. You need to encourage them, you need to motivate them, but that also often isn't enough. You need to how to say, give them space to do something. So let's say they have some agile development and they have their sprints. So one good thing is to go back to the roots and do some solid product management, and any cost saving initiatives should be ranked with the effort required, the confidence level, the business value, and the risk as any other feature. So you talk with the product owner and product manager and try to bring any cost saving initiatives into the same, how to say, big bucket of to dos, right? And they should be planned as if they were features of the product and not lured in somehow behind because the exec said we need to cut costs. And then, depending on what the company does, it could be that it's good to do it every sprint a little, or maybe dedicate one big sprint of the year for cost saving initiatives. Depending on what the company does, either way, either strategy works fine. But it needs to be, how to say, through the whole process and be approved.
I like how you said from the top down approach of changing the KPIs. Typically, here's what happened is that KPIs has been around for a while and you've only tailored them a little bit, tweaked it a little bit for cloud, right? I think FinOps does work on prem as well as efficiently in the cloud. And the KPIs that once worked on prem don't really work for the cloud and they need to change. The executives need to understand that the engineers do need these times to perform additional tasks and care about the stuff they're doing. But right there to your point, 110% of just keeping it up and running. How much time do I have to invest in myself to invest in a company. And those days that are set aside to do that, or 20% that you're supposed to be doing that, you're like, yeah, yeah, I'll get to that. It's pushed aside because I'm not measured upon it. I'm measured upon the value of keeping the infrastructure up and running.
Mhm. And then another thing you said there, and you said FinOps works also on-prem. I say yes, but if. Because the thing is, typical any legacy company with IT will have horizontal teams, one for database, one for monitoring, one for
Yep.
security, and so on. You have for every kind of stack set or skill set, you have your basically your team. Now comes the FinOps practitioner and said, I read somewhere in the FinOps book that we should have chargeback. And I think that's so absolutely unfair for, let's say, the database team to have chargeback because they're providing internal services, but they have no control over how much those databases are used. So if they get charged back and try them to be as efficient as possible, that's absolutely unfair. Unless you go one step higher and say, let's create a virtual team and a virtual budget for workload A, for workload B, for workload C.
That I
And then
agree with.
and then we have the chargeback internally and saying the charge. So basically, the team for the database has its own chargeback because they have bills and stuff to pay for. Okay, they have their own budget.
Yep.
But then they split the usage by workloads and charge that back to all the product owners.
Yep.
And they will have their own budget and their own chargeback. And then suddenly the sum comes out perfect as zero, right? Of everything. Because otherwise, you're just bashing the teams providing your services internally. And so I think there needs to be some time invested by any company to go there. And the keyword here is time. It's a journey. You can't just say that we will start, I don't know, DevSecOps in January and then or next week or something, and then basically everyone agrees on it. No, it doesn't work. You need to restructure. You need to rethink. You need to reallocate budgets. That needs a lot of planning, working, and motivating people. Because if the wrong people inside the company, excuse me, step on the brake and say, no, we are not going to do that, then you're stuck. You need to basically work with what you have. And that's where the FinOps practitioner can do much more than any engineer alone or any finance people alone or any procurement people alone. So you need somebody who sits in the middle, above or outside the hierarchy somehow, and can come up with uncomfortable decisions. And that's why FinOps is so great in that.
Eric, our topic today is data driven strategies without data. Is that possible? And how does that entail? How does that work?
Okay, let's start with that. One thing, you can bring in data from others that are in a similar situation. And the other thing is, the most important thing is, you start a strategy as if you had data. Okay. And whenever there is a missing information, you put a placeholder, and that's a to-do list to get that data. And that's how you build a strategy without data. So basically, you know what data you need. And if you don't have it yet, then that's top priority to get it and to work with the people to enable the communication within teams and to share that data. And that's how you create a strategy which is data driven without data. The goal is the data driven processes and everything. So you go towards cloud unit economics and all that. And you don't have all the data, but that means you should start anyway. You should start because that's where you want to get. If you never start, you never get there. And you shouldn't just iteratively wait until you have enough data, then say, now I have all the data, let's start now a strategy. No, that's too late already. Then you've already made costly mistakes and put something that shouldn't be in the cloud typically.
Eric, provide me an example because here's what I'm envisioning. I'm going to the cloud, right? I'm doing a lift and shift minus the
Mhm.
F because I like that already. So just a little bit of humor on the side. Eric was talking about the lift and shift stuff, and we might get to that during their conversation. But I'm going to the cloud, right? And I needed data of this application that's going there. I know I use so much CPU, RAM, the whole layout, but I don't really know what that looks like in the cloud. Are you saying that I do an estimate or I put a variable there and I say, hey, this is what I need, and I can do my right size and I can do my evaluation afterwards as long as I have the data then to back it up and I might make changes after it's moved?
I would say yes and no, and that's not a good answer, but let me dive deeper. So, as I said before, if you still have horizontal teams, you typically also have horizontal workloads. Like you say, has server A and 58 applications running on it. And when they migrate it to the cloud, they don't consider the 58 applications. They just say, we have server of this size. Let's create another server of this size. So that kind of data you already have. You know which the list of applications, for example, is data. So use that and create your workloads for the applications and not migrate the hardware as is. Okay. So it's a lift and shift with a minor tweak. So basically, you migrate the workloads, not the hardware. And then you simply say, but the data is also not only logs and metrics and stuff. For example, who is the budget owner? That's an information. That for me is data. If you don't know who the budget owner is for each application, stop, don't migrate. Wait a little until you have that figured out, because otherwise somebody simply will say our costs are too high, but who to blame? Who's responsible for it? Who will make the decision to cut down, to move back to the on-prem, or do whatever decision? So you can't just migrate and say blindly that's it. Somebody will take care of it. So that is all the, if you're still pre-migration, that is the data, and the missing data is also hugely important, because that means that unless you have figured it out, you should not migrate yet. You should just maybe continue working on your data-driven strategy without data until you have enough data to at least start the migration, and then you evolve to the next cycle of your migration, and that is basically post-migration, right? When you start looking into what you could optimize, tear down, rebuild for the cloud to specifically to optimize and make it more efficient for the cloud. But it's still always about, do we know everything we need to know to go one step ahead? So you need to think that you need to know the strategy, even if you don't have all the data. If you don't have all the data, then you work on that until you have it.
Are you saying that I should have all the data and optimize before I go to the cloud?
Not
Or
necessarily. No, no, not necessarily. But if you, it depends what your strategy is. So let's say that you, um, for example, you could be a bank where some regulation forces you to have your data centers apart by, I don't know, 30 miles or something like that. And if you don't, maybe you have a time frame within you have to move to the cloud to have a third data center, and say that your cloud data is well apart from the, and you're within regulations again. So it depends on your time frame. But in my opinion, the fastest way to be efficient in the cloud is to do the lift and shift first. And as you said, the second F is silent. And then you tear down everything and start optimizing. That's the fastest way to become efficient. You have a huge cost spike, but for a shorter amount of time. If you try to migrate while optimize, you might never even finish really migrating and operating, and you are still in that limbo where you have to synchronize all the data back and forth between on-prem and the cloud, and that is costly. And then maybe stuff isn't really running well, and no, it's that is not the way I would choose. Quick and fast and dirty, and then you start tearing down costs, applications for optimization.
Eric, there has been said, and a number of people said lift and shift going to the cloud and immediately, and then planning to optimize afterwards typically sometimes doesn't work. People don't do it. And there's a huge cost associated with it where it's a continued cost or
Mhm.
a refactoring cost when you lift and shift. Nobody ever refactors. Refactor before you go there and then move it to the cloud. And there's so many different perspectives on what you should do. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's, I would introduce another type of cost, and that is cost of agency. So if you, as a company owner, let others decide what to do with the company, then you introduce the cost of agency. There's this famous example of Henry Ford, who had somebody sitting on his board of administrators, and they were planning on some long-term investments to get more productive, more efficient, and stuff like that. And this basically board member was close to retiring. They didn't have the pension like we do now, but so he wanted to have all the liquidity he could get out of the company to have as a fund to retire on. So he blocked all the long-term investments, right? So he didn't act in the interest of the company, but his own interest. And that is a good example for cost of agency. So if you have people that care about the money of the company owner, then this problem shouldn't even exist. Then they would try to optimize what's best for the company. So it's all down to how they are incentivized to work for the company and earn their loyalty towards the company, in my opinion, at least. So because if it's not your money, then it's no big problem. But it is, at least nowadays, it is your problem. We have people, we have companies that struggle and then they start laying off people. So maybe acting in the interest of the company would be a good way to counteract that somehow. Not easy, obviously, but I think just if you check your numbers and you've crunched some numbers, I think yes, the one I proposed is the best way. So it's start optimizing afterwards. If you don't optimize afterwards, then you will have other huge opportunity costs. As if you cut costs, then you can later have that as a budget to invest more. If you go from running legacy software in the cloud, typically you have a lot of people to keep it running, restarting it, and keeping it operating, and you have a huge amount of people engineering working on that. So it's almost like being on-prem, but worse and more costly. So if you recreated that fully, I don't know, serverless or at least cloud native, leveraging all the managed services that you can get, then also the development times are like a fraction. What on-prem maybe took 6 months or a year, in the cloud is maybe 3 or 4 weeks, because just sometimes you join the dots, have some glue code, and then means that you can pick up the pace of innovation. And then some cost of opportunity disappears, like if you can outpace your competition, means you get more customers. If you get more customers, you get more revenue. So losing out on that is such a huge cost, right? So I see I'm say costs are irrelevant as such, but I'm very addicted to talking about costs because there are so many hidden costs, opportunity costs, cost of agency. Everything costs somehow, even time. So the time, for example, lost time can never be won back. We say time is money, but time is not like money. Try to collect some time for now for future use. Try that. So it doesn't work, right? So you have to invest your time wisely to do as much as you can with all the work time that you have, and then still optimize for costs and for efficiency and stuff like that. So it's I don't know exactly what what point I'm trying to make, but sorry.
Actually, I'm going to dive in a little bit more. You said costs are irrelevant, while cost is a driving factor of cost optimization,
Yep.
FinOps, and cloud
I'm
financial management.
I'm omitting a word there on purpose, and that is cost alone are irrelevant.
Ah, okay, cost
But it's a good
alone. Okay.
conversation. It's a good conversation starter.
Well, it is. I mean, think about it, because the reason that you implement, and I think people implement FinOps in most cases, and I say most cases, and a little bit for the wrong reasons. They just want to go in and save costs, but they don't realize that it's more about, I want to say, making money, because I know that's the cliche that's really talked about not only within Cloud FinOps and FinOps Foundation and making money, but I
Mhm.
think it's the culture and understanding the business and all the benefits and the factors, that it's a continuous cycle of evolution where you got to continuously look at what's being done and optimize. And I think what happens in the end when people are like, oh, I want to save a ton of money, even if you save a ton of money, say if you save $1 million for the company, well, that budget's already been allocated. Now it's going to go right back into the company, right back into the stuff that you're being utilized. If you don't use it, the budget's gone and you don't have it for next year.
Mhm. The thing is, let me state this very carefully. You should never optimize for cost. Never. Because
I
if
agree with you.
because then I would say, okay, shut down everything, fire everybody, 100% cost saves, minus 2%, which is my bonus, obviously. And well done, job done. So you
Yep.
should never optimize for
That
cost
would
at
be
all.
like this.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
thanks. But so you should optimize for efficiency. You should try to get the best value for your buck, right? And that means sometimes even investing more. Let's say that you have some cloud resources that are undersized, not oversized. And that means you have service degradation and failure, you have angry customers and stuff like that. That means that to avoid the cost of losing customers, you need to spend. And then it's not just about cutting costs, it's about allocating money where it's needed to run things in the cloud. And making money, honestly, I know it's a buzzword and it's a slogan, but that's actually what it is about. Because, as I said before, if you can speed up the innovation pace of your development teams, that means that you can ship features sooner, the time to market is less, your competitional advantage on the market is bigger, you get more customers and stuff like that. So there are so many factors you need to consider that introduce or bring costs on other levels just than looking at the bills that you receive by your cloud service provider, right? So if we try to minimize costs, I agree only if and only if we talk about all kinds of costs and we still want to have performance with it to match. Otherwise, I say, let's consider everything you run and try to make it as performant as possible make it as efficient as possible without touching the performance of it. So we have your SLAs, we have your how to say, you need to bring a certain kind of level of quality of service. And if we don't go below that quality of service, but we still can cut costs, yeah, okay, I agree with that. But still, that's optimizing for efficiency. But sometimes it's looking also one step beyond, because, for example, I worked with a customer of mine, and they had some huge costs with their backend, and it didn't make sense. So at first, I'll just look at the numbers, okay, and say, okay, we could do some right sizing here and there, and we can do a little bit of reservations and some savings plans, the usual stuff. But then I looked at it and I looked at the number of customers working on it, and I thought, hey, there's something wrong. Why is that so expensive? Why there is no, basically, I don't know, a couple of thousands customers, nothing much. So it should be working on the minimum size of an instance, not at this size. So we started looking into it, and those were legacy developers who had tried to bring the legacy development frameworks into the cloud using step functions and Azure functions and stuff like that, with huge libraries that every time loaded the entire database into memory when doing a single operation. And I mean, that isn't efficient. So I removed them all from their project, restructured a couple of all the access functions. I introduced also this design first principle. So I designed the API for them and made the schema. We went into code generation, and basically the performance went up, or I would take it like that. The response times went down by 98.6%, and their development pace picked up by something like a factor of five, not 5%, 5 times faster shipping features, thanks to code generation stuff. Because before they were just typing all the access functions to the data manually. Then I'm professionally lazy, so I thought, hey, let's create an API with all your tables, all your schemes, all your functions, and then code generation. And basically 90% of the code is now code generated automatically. And that obviously speeds up things, because you don't have to test every single function if it's automatically generated. It's either all of them wrong or all of them correct.
Eric, I want to dive into your example a little bit. Do you think from taking their legacy database, their legacy kind of framework, and moving it to the cloud is not having the right data in order to understand it, or because they're so used to having maybe the on premise where they didn't have to pay for cost of a server because it was amortized over 5 years,
Mhm.
that they weren't concerned with that, and they needed the skill sets, the understanding, and the right information in order to implement it into the cloud?
Both. I would say both. Some of them are aware and some of them don't care. because you will
But how do
always
you get
have.
them to care? That just goes back to the same conversation you and I were talking about is in you have engineers doing stuff and they're
Mhm.
at max of 110%, but how do you get them to care about the company and doing that? Because I mean, does the company care about them is usually typically the feeling. I mean,
That's
and I
the
got another
one.
question on top of that. But go ahead.
But that's the one thing I've seen so many people working in situations where they're just trying to get that to the end of the day and forget about it. So the people are, how could I say, yeah, I would say to some degree even exploited. Working for minimum salary, or not minimum salary, but let's say, call it minimum competitive wage, like the
Yep.
minimum wage they can get by for that kind of job, and trying to squeeze them out with some performance metrics, and even, I don't know, have some webcam installed, monitoring them and taking pictures every minute and stuff like that. So there are kind of companies who do that. And obviously, if you work in such a situation, you have your, I don't know, specifications. You work towards those. You don't think the company deserves more of your effort and time. So I think it depends on how the company treat their developers and engineers. If they treat them well, and if it's like a family more than a company, then obviously those will be much more inclined to help their family and company, right? If you squeeze them like slaves, then you get what you deserve almost. And it's also like, everyone wants to cut costs by outsourcing. I mean, if you were a 3-star Michelin chef, would you outsource your kitchen? No, you wouldn't. So anything close to the core values of your company should stay within the company as much as possible, right? Also because they also maybe deal with the managers being angry if something doesn't work. So if you have some engineers that talk to customer support at lunch breaks, then you hear the customer support guy saying, hey, the new feature, sorry, not working. Then you have some feedback, and people are maybe also a little bit ashamed if it doesn't work. If you work outsourced somewhere offshore, yeah, you work towards specifications, and maybe the specification forgot to say that it should work and that should be efficient
Oops,
and
forgot that
performant.
in my line
Yeah,
item.
yeah, sorry. And so it does exactly what the specification said it should be. So there's so many label. We cannot just say label all engineers in, or group them in one bucket and say they're good or bad. Um, but still, if I think you need to provide them with the space, as I said before, to be heroes. So that means also, in some cases, higher wages, more time to do stuff. And if you cut down the costs, then you have the possibilities to provide them with more wage and more time.
I saw a post where it was actually very interesting, and it's so true. Where like a manager says to HR, "Hey, this guy wants a 5% increase," and then HR goes, "Well, good. We should pay them because it's going to cost us 30% increase just to hire and get somebody else onto the team and new. You should
Mhm.
just reinvest in what you're doing." Here's an interesting question. I want you to think about this one. Do you feel that there's a correlation between strictly startups born in the cloud? And then because we're talking about engineering is performing action and our data driven strategies without data, and this kind of all ties together. But think about startups that are born in the cloud, on premise that are trying to go to the cloud, right? Do you think there's a correlation? Because I think a lot of startups, a lot of engineers in those startups care, right? They care about the company, they feel valued. And I'm talking small companies, usually, whatever it is. But then those who are going to the cloud and trying to implement FinOps and do all the things, they don't really, you don't need to, it's tough time to get them to perform the action. Do you think there's
I
some type
think
of
that
correlation?
I see a correlation between that, definitely, because let's say that you're a startup and you still don't have funding. That means that you have private money. If you implement something that isn't efficient in the cloud, you're going bust immediately. So any engineer will be very cost aware, even terrified of cost, making even the wrong decisions to avoid costs. Okay, because otherwise they drown, they go under. They will not survive if they go out of money. So if you, as a startup, buy some hardware, then you can squeeze the 100% out of that hardware, and maybe don't think about efficiency as much, right? Yeah, maybe you have the electricity bill to pay, but you won't have that kind of cost spike, obviously. So I think that definitely influences how developers think. At the same time, I think that I would rather have developers being fast at implementing stuff and then only being cost aware. So I don't want cost awareness to be at the cost of speed of innovation, if you get me.
I do. Do you feel that there's a balance between being efficient as a developer and an engineer and being cost aware? Is there a happy medium? Because at one
No,
point,
there isn't. No, no,
okay,
sorry.
well,
It's basically, it will always be like a pendulum, like back and forth,
yeah.
back and forth. So you try to go fast, and then you say, "Oh shit, costs too much." Then you're a little back, and there is no easy way to stay in the middle. I think so. I would say, obviously, there are some things that if you're good at analyzing bottlenecks, for example, if you already think like bottlenecks, that's what I'm doing all the day. So that's why I'm good at it after a lot of years. Um, if I create something new, then my neural pathways already go in that direction, right? So I don't think about cost too much because I already know I discarded the too costly alternatives, right? But if you're not aware and haven't worked all your life on cutting costs or working around bottlenecks, then if you just choose between options and you have no idea about the repercussions, then I think it's time to do some training on complexity, on algorithms, on data patterns, and stuff like that, and think about and just take a crunch a couple of numbers. And if you don't want to learn that, then at least create a couple of proof of concepts. And that's, for example, something that Spotify is doing. If they have a new concept, then they run three different or a couple of different architectures for the same feature, and then they test it with exponentially growing numbers of users on it, and to see how the cost curve goes up. So they know how many users they will have, and they try to optimize for that range of users depending on the cost curve, right? So they don't just try the trust the theory of what it should be like. They really have a testing mechanism where they step up the numbers of users in testing to prove their concept of how the cost curve should look like for their architecture. So I think you can do that. At least if you're a large company, you should definitely do stuff like that if you have a large customer base that is going to use your infrastructure. Because you might have something that looks very efficient for a small number of users and then goes up like hell. Or otherwise, maybe something like doesn't look efficient at all for 10 users because it's already expensive, but can handle, I don't know, 10 billion users. So it's very difficult to predict that just looking by an architecture diagram.
Eric, when you were mentioning horizontal teams, in which we call like silo teams, you have your database, your admins, you
Mhm.
have your Linux, your Windows. In a traditional enterprise environment, do you feel that there are still horizontal teams in the cloud today?
Yes, those company who never shifted company culture. I mean, they shifted the tech to the cloud, but the company stayed the same.
Which brings an interesting question on now you've just implemented more friction between everybody because those who are, even if you have a cloud team, right? Now the cloud team has to know all this stuff, but then they have to talk and still communicate with the silos or the horizontal teams because they're implementing the cross communication, not only databases, you have your direct connects, everything. And one of the biggest things, one of the biggest challenges I see that the culture, if it's a startup, I feel that there's not those horizontal teams. I feel
Mhm.
that, you know,
No.
everybody's learning and getting implemented, but if it's a enterprise that's going to the cloud, I don't feel that they've properly implemented a single type of team. What are your recommendations?
Getting executive buy-in. Explain to executive what will happen if you don't do this long term, and that is high inefficiency for a long time. And also, there's one other big factor there that you might overlook because maybe you're too nice, and that is office politics. Have you an idea
Oh,
how many people sit on information as a means of staying in power. So that means they want silos. They want to become and stay indispensable. They will not share information just to benefit the whole thing of the company. Again, cost of agency. And that's
Actually,
something that you find in,
that's 2 topics right there. Not only the politics, but if you think about it, is those who are concerned with job security. They like having that information because they wanna, obviously still do the clicking, right?
Mhm.
Click ops was always a fun term. But I think office politics play a key role in not moving efficiently to the cloud or any implementation of culture change.
Yep, definitely. So office politics as that kind of office politics and pay what's called sorry power plays are toxic for any kind of innovation. And if you have execs that are can be made aware of that, then you have a change how to say possibility of changing that. Otherwise, sorry, won't work. It will stay like that forever because they will see that they are threatened by this new innovation. They will do everything to block it, or even say, "Go ahead and let it all go to I won't say the word.
We'll say lift and shift without the F.
Yes.
They will say go ahead. Here's one of the things that I see, and it's typically happens in larger companies trying to implement any type of thing, and it's not even the cloud, right? Is that if you have some of those in higher up positions that don't see the value or not bought into it, whether they say they are or not, they're going to follow the chain of command, but they're going to be in the back not fully supporting it, which kind of drags it down into the culture change and not being able to implement things. And I know we're talking a little cross subjects here, but I think it goes to the whole thing about even just trying to implement a change like FinOps.
Yeah, I think I would never go to one of those managers who are blocking and tell them they need to change. No, I wouldn't, because that they see it. Yeah, I've been doing this for 20 years. Who you, right? I will be here in 20 years still, and you won't. So um, that won't work. But what can work, and quite brilliantly, is that if you provide them with a prospect of having data to decide to make more their strategies more data driven for their application, for their product, for their workload, whatever. If you provide them with data and say, hey, if you had those numbers, wouldn't you be happier because you could predict the next numbers, I don't know, for your teams, hire teams before you need it, right? Not after you need it, and stuff like that. So if you lure them with the prospect of the benefits of data driven decisions, then if you have them bought in on that, then you at the end say, yeah, but we need you to share your data. And they will probably then maybe give up the power play and say, yeah, okay, it's worth it. Otherwise, if you try just a frontal attack with them like locking horns, no, it won't work. That won't work.
Eric, my last question before we wrap things up is what recommendation or advice would you give people that are trying to implement FinOps or trying to do a change? And I know we're talking about data driven decisions without data, but I think there's a huge tie in to implementing any culture, including FinOps.
Ooh, that's a big questions. And if it's the last one, I think either you let me talk for a couple of days, or I need to again to say it depends a little bit. But you know what? I would say it with another thinking outside the box answer, and that is reach out to the FinOps community. Because the thing is, if you're, for example, are in a junior position as a FinOps practitioner in a legacy kind of organization, then you will be too junior to impress and convince senior managers and exec to do something, so that even if you're right, you don't have the right amount of white hair, right? You don't have enough f-ups stories to make them laugh and stuff like that. It's difficult to bring by change if you're a junior, right? So I am actually mentoring a junior FinOps practitioner, and he went from being frustrated and very sad after 9 months now, I think, yeah, We meet each other for half an hour like that, and we just talk about what he could do in the company to work around that. So I'm a little bit of a motivator and trying to think like an old legacy manager and trying to let him work around it and get some credibility and motivate them. And that seems to be working. So I would say if you're always on the same point, and you don't move forward, reach out to the community. There might be somebody who has been in your same situation and have some tricks up their sleeve that you're not aware about. So I would say that always works. Reach out to the community. We are quite helpful.
I agree. The community has actually been really key. And FinOps is one of the biggest communities that I've been a part of. And everybody is just wanting to learn how you did things, learn new ways. And it's an ever changing and evolving culture. Don't forget, you can actually go out and on LinkedIn, and there's so many people for the FinOps community that you want to join. Just tag a couple, reach out, message. A lot of us are really down to earth that just want to kind of give our knowledge to you. Erik, I got to wrap things up, but thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. And looking forward to the next one. I hope there will be one.
There will be a next one, and there might be some in-person stuff. Hint, hint.
Hint, hint, I won't be at FinOps X, sorry, this year.
I
But
will be, but don't worry. You'll be at some other events. I know maybe you'll be at reInvent, and we could do some things.
let's look forward to that. Or maybe you
Yeah.
come to Barcelona in November,
What's in Barcelona in November?
the European FinOps X.
Oh, if I get invited, I'm coming to it.
Yeah, I know Barcelona is on the beach and they have good food and good wine there.
Ooh, I'll put that on the
Wink,
list. I'll have to reach out to the F2 for an invitation for a speaking slot. Let's see if I get one.
okay, that would be
Uh,
great.
yeah, definitely. All right, Erik, thank you so much.
Okay, see ya. Bye.
All right, so yeah, everybody, this has been the Jon Myer Podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify because guess what? We're out of here.